We're here today with Amanda Kail, president of MNEA. It's the first of our interview sessions. We're going to be talking about public education and the fight against public education. And we want to know how we can become better informed to talk to our lawmakers about what's going on with legislation about the MNEA public education in the city as well as the state. Our rural education as well. So thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it so much. Tell me about yourself and how you got to be president of MNEA and what you guys do there.
Sure. So I have been a teacher for 10 years. Started out in Atlanta, moved here, became a teacher at Margaret Allen Middle School. I taught EL, which is English language learners. And I actually was not involved. The MNEA, for those who don't know, is our teacher union here in Nashville. And we're a local affiliate of the Tennessee Education Association, TEA, and the National Education Association, NEA. So we're sort of your local affiliate. And if you're talking to folks around the state, just about every school district should have a local affiliate there. So that's just a little thing that a good way to connect with teachers and to learn about public education is to check in with your local affiliation. I became president when 2 years ago. I got very involved in the fight for funding our schools. One of the things I'll talk about is how schools in Nashville and really across the country have been systematically, chronically underfunded. It has been deliberate. And so I got involved in that fight and I started the Red for Ed movement here in Nashville, the Nashville Red for Ed, back in 2018, which culminated in a walkout on May 16th, 2019. And of teachers, over 1,000 of us walked out. We had been filling public meetings and protesting and picketing in front of our schools, trying to get full funding for our schools. And at the same time, a group of us who were very activist-minded ran for office within our local affiliate, were elected to our positions. And so we won all of our seats. And we have been working since then to really focusing on a lot of things, but funding for Metro Nashville Public Schools has been one of our key fights.
And you got that this year, right? So
we got a lot further than we ever have been. There's still more to go, but yes, we made a major victory this year.
Awesome. And also I heard there's some federal money coming in as well to the city schools. So it's looking up for sure. But tell us kind of the history of when all this started, when the defunding started and why it started. And is there a time period or a date or anything?
Yeah. So it's tied together with efforts to privatize public sector everything. So there's a lot of funding that goes to public schools. It is the biggest investment that we make as a society in equity. And I really want people to understand that. You know, there is no other time in anyone's life in which everybody is supposed to be given a fair shot. And we do so much to supply everyone with what they need to be at the, you know, at an equal playing field, at a level playing field. And I want to talk about equity versus equality because some kids need a lot of support and some kids don't need as much. And so investments can be different in the public sector depending on, for example, what the level of poverty is at a school. You know, that's a big indicator. Obviously, kids who live in poverty are going to need more support than those who don't. So there has been a movement very much tied to, you see it a lot in the charter school movement. in the voucher movement, to try to divert your public tax dollars to private companies. And they set up these charter schools. They do not have to answer to an elected school board. And so they are less democratic. And they can essentially do more or less whatever they want. So there's been this effort to divert funding from the public schools to these private charters, and then vouchers where they just take funding and give it directly to parents and say, go find a private school that will, accept $7,000 as annual tuition. And if you know anything about private school, that's nothing. Yeah. So, the funding has really dried up because there's just one bucket of money, right? It's not like when we decide to have charter schools, we get more money for those charter schools. They just take the money out of that pot and they put it over into the charters, which serves a few kids, and they take it away from the public schools, which serves everybody. The other thing to know about is the way that tax structures have been created. And that gets, that can get very technical, and I won't go deep into that here. But I can tell you, as someone who's been fighting for funding, if you go to your local elected leaders, so if you go to the Metro Council in Nashville, they will tell you often that the reason that your schools are underfunded is because the state underfunds us, which is true. They do underfund us. But if you go and you talk to the state about that problem, your state representatives will tell you the reason that we are underfunded is because of the tax rates that are set by Metro Council and the mayor. And so you get sent back and forth and back and forth. And really what we need is both groups to fix both problems. Because there are reasons why the state underfunds us, and there's reasons why our local government underfunds us. But the net result is the same. We've been receiving about 60% of what we need. And if you can imagine trying to run 147 schools, 86,000 kids, hundreds of languages, kids with all levels of abilities, on 60% of the funding that you're supposed to get. And you start to understand why that's a problem. And one of the biggest problems we've seen is that a lot of kids don't have teachers. Teacher pay has been frozen for so many years that very few people are going into that profession anymore. And the people who are going into it aren't staying because salaries keep being frozen, and it becomes a career that is extremely demanding and doesn't seem to have much of a future. And so one of the things that we noticed as teachers is that many of our students were missing chunks of their education because they simply did not have a teacher. So, for example, a kid might go into 5th grade and the math teacher quits. And so there's no math teacher, and they get a substitute maybe off and on. They get split up and put into overcrowded classrooms. But the education of that child suffers because they didn't have the math teacher that they needed. And then the next year, they don't have an English teacher. And the next year, they don't have a science and a social studies teacher. And that's extremely common, especially at our high poverty schools. And so you see that kids are really just being shortchanged. And so when teachers talk about needing more funding so that teacher wages are competitive, it's not just because, teachers want to make more money. It's because literally there are kids going without teachers. I had a story of a student who really worked hard his entire life, came from a really rough place, had several family members incarcerated, but stuck to the straight and narrow, worked really hard, had a dream to go to UT to be an engineer. Well, to get into that program requires foreign language. And when he was in high school, they couldn't keep a Spanish teacher. And so this kid who had worked so hard is watching his dream slip away because the school district couldn't hire somebody that would do that job. And so you can start to see how this really perpetuates inequities in our society, in our city, in our state, when kids' education is interrupted like that constantly.
Is this more of a, is it more of an urban problem than a rural problem? You know, I grew up in rural Alabama, and I had the same teachers the entire time. You know, I had it was just so different. And I don't have children, so I don't know what it's like to have a child in education. But what's the rural versus urban differences?
What you see with the rural districts, you're right. You don't see as much turnover. But what you see is that rural districts are not able to offer a lot of things. And so, for example, you see art, music, athletics, all of those, foreign language, technical training, computer training, all of those sorts of things are not offered because they don't have the funding to provide it. And so once again, you see this inequity being perpetuated because some kids get access to that and others don't. And the whole point of public education is that we're trying to give every kid a solid foundation to launch themselves. Once they graduate from high school, okay, look, they're on their own. They got to make their own decisions. They got to, but when they're children, what we're trying to say is, the playing field is not level. And so the work of public schools is to make it level. And so regardless of where you are in Tennessee as a child, we're trying to promise to you, we're going to give you a fair shot. The same shot that, kids anywhere would get. And so with the rural districts, you'll see that. You'll see that there is a lot less offered because they don't have the funding.
Right, because I didn't have like art school or anything like that, but I did have civics and history and democracy, and I think a lot of people don't have that now. I don't know. We still teach those things. I think the bigger danger right now are all of the incredibly racist, homophobic, transphobic bills coming out of the legislature attacking what we can and cannot teach. So we still teach civics. The problem is when your state is governed by a radical supermajority who want to essentially just eliminate any sort of version of government or history that does not align with their radical view, then you get into some pretty dangerous territory. So that legislation right now is very dangerous because it will remove funding from school districts that portray LGBT people in any possible positive way, who discuss race and racism. That is dangerous because it is really it's really hamstringing our schools and forcing us to not teach the whole picture. Right. So going back to the charter schools, what is the difference in here between the magnet schools and charter schools versus just your public high schools, junior high? Is charters a part of public education?
Yeah. So in certain parts of the state, and get ready, rural districts, because this is actually about to hit you with new legislation that's coming out. We have charter schools as a part of our district in MNPS. You'll also see them in Memphis and Nashville are the two biggest places you see them. Not surprisingly, they're also the biggest Democratic strongholds. They're also the places that have the largest majority of Black and Brown students and population, which I don't think I need to say our legislature is not super helpful to. There's a few you'll find here and there in Knoxville, Chattanooga, but Governor Lee has been really pushing to expand that. Charter schools are run by a private corporation. And so they apply to have a charter school. It goes to the local school board. But the way it is in Tennessee is if your locally elected school board says, no, this charter school does not meet the standards of our district, what then happens is that they send it to the state charter authorizer, which was set up under a previous administration, and they just override it. So they override your locally elected school board every time. They never say no. And to be clear, some of these charter schools are extremely shady. A lot of them you'll find you can track back to investment deals around real estate. So what they want is they want the building. They want to use public tax dollars to buy it, and they'll open a school and then they'll just close it randomly and sell the business, make a profit. So it's extremely scammy stuff. Now, there are some charter schools out there that are started by parents that are sort of like experimental sort of school community-based things. And those can be different than that. I don't want to say that all charter schools are that way, but by and large, the bottom line for charter schools is profit, not education. So that's just something that people need to bear in mind. You'll also see that there are okay, so you asked the difference between those. So the charter schools are run by a private company, essentially. And then a magnet school is one that usually it is a public school. It's run by the public schools, but you generally have to apply to be able to be a part of. They tend to focus on either advanced academics or the arts or something like that. And they're set up essentially to be something that students have, students who are really showing a high level of performance in academics or the arts or whatever it is, that there's this school that really develops them even further. There are limited seats for those. There is a lottery system here in Nashville that tries to provide some equity because, quite honestly, the majority of folks who tend to get into those magnet schools are wealthy and white. Those students have more resources. They have parents who are better able to advocate. And that has long been a concern of many parents who have kids who are talented and, show great promise, but they didn't have all the extra tutoring. They didn't have all access to all of the special summer programs that other kids' parents may have sent them to. And so there is, that's a conversation that is a continual conversation. How do we make sure that our magnet schools are equitable? I think at the end of the day, what I want people to understand is when we talk about school systems and what is the right thing to do, a lot of people like to come back to Finland. Finland has long had one of the best school systems in the world. And what they did is actually really boring, but it's revolutionary. They made sure every single school was great. Period. They made sure every single school had advanced academics, had had lots of options for art and foreign language and all of that. And they made them all just basically the same. And they offered it to all students. So there was not this funneling off of kids into this special thing or that special thing. All kids got the same opportunities, and the opportunities were all great. And that's ultimately really what needs to happen if you really want to see things improve. You know, we've been fed a lie for many, many years that our schools are quote unquote failing, right? And you don't want to send your kid to this school because it's dangerous, it's failing. But what's actually been happening is that your schools have been systematically underfunded so that those schools don't have what they need. We've seen a perpetuation of poverty. And so the families don't have what they need to support their kids. And we have this stratification. We have people being divided. Some kids go off to charter schools and some kids go off to magnet schools. And then, you know, we blame the people in the schools who are doing the best they can to try to meet very complex needs and say, your school is failing, it's not worth saving. Well, that's been around, you know, for a while. It really ramped up under No Child Left Behind, under George W. Bush. And we have seen years of testing that has resulted in overwhelmingly closing Black and brown schools, closing high poverty schools, and perpetuating more inequality.
And it's basically a myth. I was reading some history. Our test scores were not better back in the, you know, good old days. I mean, it's all a myth that's been perpetuated by these people. And also, you know, you get demonized as well for being a union.
Right.
You know, these same people probably that set up these charter schools are the ones demonizing, you know, a teachers union as well, when you're just trying to do the best you can.
I would say that if we look at, if you look at our schools and you say, have things gotten better since we took away collective bargaining? Have our schools benefited from that? I would say no. If you look at the schools in this country that are the highest performing, one of the things that they often have in common is that they have strong teacher unions with collective bargaining, because teachers advocate for our schools. That's what we do. And so, I mean, we're out there trying to make our schools better. And if you shut that voice out, who's left to advocate, right? I mean, can you imagine trying to silence the American Medical Association and thinking that that would like result in better health for people? NEA, the National Education Association, is the largest union in America. It's one of the largest in the world. I don't think that it is, a coincidence that we have been the target in the way that other public sector unions have not. I think that a lot of people think of the labor movement as dangerous, when really all it is giving working people a voice in their working conditions. And if you have better working conditions, if you have happier teachers, if the teachers in the schools have what they need, then of course the students are going to benefit. It just makes sense. So absolutely.
So basically it all comes down to funding. We need funding, but the fact that you said that the teachers' pay has been frozen year after year after year, I mean, that means somehow you're being targeted. I mean, if you can't, get that going, then somebody's pushing against you. Oh, it's pretty unfair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in public education, what you need are people. You'll often see that there are lots of folks who are pushing for some, special curriculum or some new way of teaching reading or math, or, that people have this silver bullet that's going to save public education. But we deal with children, And as anyone who has children knows, they're very people intensive. It takes that's what you need. You need good, strong teachers. You need counselors. You need librarians. You need social workers. You need psychologists. You need coaches. You need all of these people who are there to support kids. And at the end of the day, that's the most important part. Teachers in MNPS, we haven't really had teaching instructional materials for some time because we haven't had the funding for it. Teachers have had to, we get like one copy of something and we have to make copies of stuff, which we get limited numbers of, by the way. So, if you only get 200 copies a month and you have over 100 students, which was my situation, and you're expected to make copies of everything for your students, there you go. But teachers will make it work. We'll find a way. We're pretty good at that kind of thing. But you can't make up for the fact that there's just not a teacher there. You can't make up for the fact that there's way too many kids on a counselor's caseload for them to truly be supportive of the students. You can't make up for, just not having the people that are necessary. And so I think that's really, and it's hard because that's expensive. Ultimately, it's a lot cheaper to buy some new computer program that's going to, you think, teach kids how to read or something like that, than it is to hire, teachers to actually teach kids to read. But at the end of the day, those kids are not going to learn to read unless you have a teacher there.
Yeah. So more funding, basically. How would you approach lawmakers? Like, we're out here, we're like, we want the public educated. We want our kids educated. We want a well-rounded education. We want, you don't want things left out. You want to portray the correct history. You want to include people that are different in your teaching. And how do we approach lawmakers that don't agree with that? I mean, because that's who we need to talk to.
It is. And I will tell you, in Tennessee, we have a situation that I don't know exists anywhere else in the country. It's extremely strange. So we have, in the state of Tennessee, a lot of money. Our state government has the largest rainy day fund in the country. And we have just all of this taxpayer money that we have taken from hardworking Tennesseans, and it's just being hoarded. I don't know how else to say it. It's just being hoarded. Tennessee, it ranks 45th in the nation for per pupil funding. It ranks 43rd in the nation for teacher salary. The state could fix that problem today without even raising taxes. We have the funding to invest in our schools, but we won't. It is something that is extremely strange because most places that won't invest in their public schools, they don't have the money to invest. Tennessee does. They just won't do it. So what I would say to you is that is a good place to start, to talk about the surplus, talk about the rainy day fund, and to talk about, are we really okay with being 45th in the country? That's ridiculous, especially when we don't have to be, especially when we are hampering our own future. I will tell you that if we talk about the Nashville contingent of representatives in the legislature, they would agree with you. What we need are people in other districts to start talking about that. And so, it's frustrating here in Nashville because I can call up all of my representatives in the House and Senate and say exactly that. And they'll say, Amanda, I agree with you 100%. I am screaming that from the rooftops. I'm doing everything I can, but they're in such a small minority. There's nothing that they can really make happen. And so we really need to focus our efforts on trying to push if we can reach out to our suburban neighbors, I don't know that I have a lot of faith in the deep rural districts. But I do think that we can start to reach out to our suburban neighbors. Everybody wants their kid to get a good public education, right? Everybody wants their kids to do well. That's not a controversial thing. Everybody wants to send their kids to school and assumes that there will be a teacher there who knows what they are doing. Or if their kid needs to talk to a counselor, that there'll be a counselor there. That's just basic. That shouldn't even be a partisan issue. So that, I think there's room for that. I think we can start to really try to push some of our representatives across the aisle, who are our neighbors, to make that happen.
And also let them know that there's you brought up there's inequity in rural schools as well.
Absolutely.
And they need to recognize that and be like, we could have so much more for our kids. You have a great kid, you have a kid that knows how to draw or is an artist. They need an outlet as well. And a lot of your rural schools don't have a program for that, or, they need to know they have inequities as well.
Absolutely. If you're out there in the job market and you have two candidates and one of them has, just so much more of a background because they got so much more education that is more well-rounded. They can, they speak a foreign language. They have, experienced, advanced academics. They have all of these, additional talents. They're going to be able to outcompete someone who comes from a rural district who doesn't have that any day. It's night and day. And so if we want all of our kids to have a fair shot, to have access to all of these things, then, we need to make sure that all of our schools have what they need.
And how do you talk to people as well about the meaning of a well-rounded education and learning about differences? And, I hear that a lot because they're like, well, I don't want my kid taught that or this. I would kind of just go to school and whatever we learned, it's like I would decide for myself if I, thought that was okay.
The reality is we live in a diverse world. And the more that you prevent kids from coming to a healthy understanding of that, the more you handicap them. The more that you do not, if you don't model to kids how to deal with difference, how to deal with conflict in a way that's healthy, in a way that's productive, then you are limiting where they can go and what they can do in a really major way. Because the reality is, that's what you have to know. You're going to encounter people who are different than you. You're going to encounter people who have had different experiences, who have experienced, things that you don't understand. And you have to be able to understand how to deal with that. So if we are saying to our kids, we're not going to allow you to be around anything that is uncomfortable, anything that is different from what you understand, and we're just going to shut it down, you are really limiting those kids' ability to go out and succeed in the world, because that's the way the world is. And you're not going to be able to handle it if you don't understand how to do that. You don't, like you said, you don't have to agree with everything. You, at the end of the day, you have to decide what's right for yourself. And, when I taught social studies, which is always, it's funny, it's always the most controversial subject. It's always the one that is the least paid attention to as far as resources and funding and all of that. But it's the one that, boy, do people have some opinions on. But I would always tell my students, because I would have to teach about, racism and teach about other religions and teach about all of these things. And I would say to my students, I'm telling you what's happened in the world. What you feel about it, that's up to you. That's up to your family, that you can talk to. But I'm going to tell you what happened. And I'm going to say, that racism has played a major role in our history. It has. You can't deny that. We can't say that slavery and segregation and racist violence like lynching, we can't say that didn't happen. And we can't say that it didn't happen because of racism. And that's a thing that we have to grapple with, as an out teacher. I can't even talk about, my family if I'm constrained in the way the legislature wants to constrain us. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to do that. I exist. My family exists. And so do the families of my students. And so, we would all come to this, conversation in which I would say, you don't have to think that being gay is okay. You don't. That's going to be your decision. But in this classroom, we're going to treat each other with respect. We can disagree and still coexist, Absolutely. And so that's what needs to be modeled for our students. And I think that not allowing that is a significant hindrance to our students' future.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think? What are your best resources for keeping updated with this? What groups do you? I mean, you're kind of right in the middle of everything, but who can we look to keep us updated on legislation? Does the MNEA put a lot of information out?
State legislation, the Tennessee Education Association. It really is the one that's, working at the state level. MNEA, we have a blog on our webpage, MNEA.com. And we update it at least once a week, if not more. And we tend to put out action alerts about legislation. This year, there were so many harmful bills that came out. It was a lot to keep up with. But that's always a place that you can look to. If you have folks who are in neighboring counties to Davidson, I would tell you to check in with your local education association. There should be one there. There is a Rutherford Education Association. There is a Williamson. All of those are making connections with those folks is a good way to know what's going on in your schools. But those are good resources to find. Other, at the federal level, you can always look to NEA. There's some other groups that are affiliated. The Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, AROS, AROS. They are a movement that's really focused on education justice. Which is about not only fighting for funding, not only supporting, labor, but really grounding ourselves in racial and social justice and equity work. They have a lot of information about, positive stuff that we can be fighting for. Because if you're always talking about what you're fighting against, you need to have something to fight for. And I think that their platform is something that as MNEA, we have really embraced and are working towards. There is a Tennessee chapter of AROS as well. It's a little bit in fluctuation right now, but AROS is a good source. Bargaining for the Common Good is another good resource. They are affiliated with not only NEA, but the American Federation of Teachers, AFT. And they really are about labor unions using our bargaining and organizing power to push for racial, social justice, public good, equity work, things of that nature. So those are two good, national resources that you can find.
Good deal. And because we sit here and we know our legislatures are good, and they believe in public education.
Yeah.
A lot of people, leaders in our state and lawmakers in our state, it's like, well, if I don't know who you are, or you're not in my area or my district, why should I listen to you? Mm-hmm. And that's so. Should we contact them? I mean, should we sit down and write to everybody? No.
I think that and it's hard because I know we're focused here in Davidson County, and I'm going to be honest with you. I spend all of my time volunteering in campaigns in Rutherford County because there's hope to flip those. And I know my representatives are good. I talk to them obviously, but I'm not worried about how they're going to vote. We have to start supporting our neighbors. And public education, let me just say this. Public education is a great way to do that. Reach out to teachers to do that work, because you will find that it is something that often can bridge gaps in conservative areas. A lot of people, they like teachers, they respect teachers. And so if a teacher comes and knocks on the door and says, hey, we really need you to, help support, vote for this candidate to support our schools. I have found you can really bridge that gap in a way that a lot of other folks cannot, because, public school is a thing that everybody, most people have experienced. Most people like their schools. Most people like their teachers. And, they trust teachers. And so when you say you're out there advocating for schools, like I said, it's an issue that can really bridge gaps. So I recommend really trying to reach out to your local education associations, and try to kind of support our neighbors in their push to kind of, shift more purple.
Yeah. And that goes for our, like, I'm hoping to get these interviews out to some rural areas, so they can see what's going on with MNEA and the issues we have. And so what would you, if they see this, like, what would you suggest, just working in their own county, right? I mean, just everybody staying local.
Everybody has local issues. I can't tell you what exactly the issues are, but everybody cares about something. You'll often hear people say, oh, well, people are apathetic, or, they're not going to stand up. They're afraid of speaking out, all of things like that. You'll hear that all the time. But part of what you have to do is you have to find out what really matters to people. And something like public education is a good place to start, because it impacts so many people. So many people send their kids to public schools. So many people have teachers in their families. And especially in rural districts, the school is probably one of your main employers for that county. It is one of the main focal points for your community. And so find out what your schools need, and start there. It's a great way to build. And it's not really controversial, right? To say, you know what, our school doesn't have a foreign language program. And, that means our students can't compete in this global economy as much as school districts that do have that. We would like that. We would like to have a foreign language program. Why not? Or, you know, whatever it is, or our school doesn't have, you know, that can't offer the athletics, you know, and that means our kids miss out on important, you know, sports scholarships. We'd like to have that. Find out what it is that people actually care about and work for that. And that's how you start to build an actual movement. And the people there know what it is. You just have to talk to folks. Resist the urge to go in and tell people what to do. Resist the urge to go in and tell them what they need. Because quite honestly, you're probably wrong, you know, and they'll know that. They'll know that immediately. And so you just got to find out what's important to people. Spend some time talking, listen, contact your local education association and say, hey, what is going on in our schools? What do we need in our schools? What would really make the difference? And start there.
Awesome. And what is the you know, I really believe in high-speed internet being everywhere. How are teachers involved in that in any way? I mean, you know, we need it. That is putting so many people behind.
So here's what I would say. Yes. However, I would caution against making your public schools responsible for providing internet, because that's not really our job. The problem is that you have some federal laws you're going to have to come up against if you want to make internet a public utility, which it truly needs to be. This year, we have seen that very clearly. It needs to be a public utility. But you could certainly reach out to teachers to advocate for that. It is a huge deal. I mean, I know in a lot of rural districts, there just is not high-speed internet. Like, even if you wanted it, you can't get it. And that really makes it difficult. That's a good place to start. But that battle is a big one and requires looking at some federal laws. So just be aware of that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time. Is there anything else that we can do that are not teachers, that don't have kids, but yet we believe in public education? Is there anything else you can think of as far as how we can help?
I would just say the best thing to do is to reach out to teachers and listen. You know, that is one of the best ways to find out what's going on. And it's a common good that benefits everyone. We all benefit regardless of whether we have kids or not. I personally don't have any children. I got a whole lot of adopted kids from being a teacher, but we all benefit from having a well-educated society. You know, we all benefit from that. So thinking about it in terms of how do we make sure that every student gets an excellent education, no matter who they are, no matter where they go. There's been this tendency for forever to tell schools what to do, to mandate to us how that, you know, we have to do X, Y, and Z. I think a better strategy is to reach out to your schools and find out what they need to do the job. That's what I would say.
Great. Well, thanks for your time. This has been so informative. Let us know if we need anything. We're going to try to get this video out to as many people as we can to get them some education on education and help out our local schools. So thanks, Amanda.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
All right. Bye.